website for it because I am not, I'm able to get everything.
I couldn't believe they picked up the phone.
Oh, really?
Oh, I talked to AZC.
Yeah, just go over to board. Yeah.
You know, the thing I'm interested in learning more about now is actually St. Croix County.
Yeah.
What is
Stacy,
happening? I want to know where.
it's Mike and
I
I.
don't know how you feel about
Alan
this.
is
So
up
I shouldn't say I
for
have a pretty good
re-election
idea how you
next
feel
year
about it.
with.
I have a friend who has a
He has to.
um,
So it's
son
Alan
who
and
plays
Bob,
for
and then it's Mike
Woodville
and I. Is there anybody else?
on the football team as a freshman.
And then, so,
And, I saw some pictures that
so,
they posted
yeah,
from
so
the
next year
football
is
team.
those two.
And
I know, that's kind of
Then
fun,
it's
isn't it, when they
me,
find
Mike,
something?
and Cindy,
That they're
and
excited
then
to go
you and Todd.
in the back.
Okay.
So maybe
Are
that's
you
what
allowed-
this could be, yeah.
Yeah, you're always. Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
I gotta tell you.
Yeah, I'm
You got
trying to.
a thread
All
or
right,
something.
everybody.
Get it? There you go.
Did you hear that, Bob?
Welcome and good
Yeah.
evening. I call to order the Monday, October 5th special meeting of the River Falls Board of Education. This meeting has been properly notified. Do we have any visitors or delegations who would like to address the board? Does not appear so. So we'll move on to informational items. I do want to tell people at this point that we, as a school board, have received all of these thank you notes from the football team.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's cool.
It has their picture in the back, and I'm going to spread them out so that people can have a chance to be able to read them. It was
Very
really
nice.
thoughtful of them to think about the fact that it took a lot of thinking and a lot of time for us to make the decision, and they are expressing their appreciation.
That's great.
So there you go.
It's very nice.
All right, we'll move on to informational items, and the first one would be any Wildcat roadmap updates.
No change to the Wildcat roadmap, no change to our hybrid or to our fall sports or to our spectator position currently. And I guess I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. That's an action item, but we don't have any revisions to that Wildcat roadmap. I would just mention that, you know, we continue to look at the virtual e-school supports and how we can improve in that school of 360 kiddos. And at the same time, we're also looking for ways to continually improve our hybrid model, specifically the 7th through 12th grade students that are in school 2 days a week. You know, there's a Wednesday skinny kind of class schedule that takes place. And the teachers are working hard, obviously, to build a scaffolding of activities for the off days when students are not in school, but we know that there's room to improve upon there as well. And we all look forward to the day when everybody comes to school 5 days a week.
Exactly. So for the second informational item, refers to ionization potential technology for the school district. And I'm assuming that Chad and Joe, are you folks on that?
My brief intro for these two gentlemen would just be to say that with all of our district efforts with mitigating the potential spread of COVID, one of the things that we've looked into, have been looking into, is what type of technology exists for us to help with air quality in our schools. So filtration comes to mind, airflow, more frequent airflow are some things that we have currently been doing, but there's a fairly new, I would call it, my words would be emerging technology related to ionization. And so Chad and Joe have been looking into that technology to verify whether it's just a bunch of snake oil and really doesn't do anything that it's proclaimed to do, or whether it really can add air quality to our schools. And so that's my quick intro for the two of you.
Very good intro. And we're going to kind of break this into a few pieces. I'm going to give
The rough introduction needs a little bit more detail. Joe is going to then get into detail. And then on the phone, we have Randy Christensen, who is an engineer at KFI Engineers out of the Twin Cities. He's had quite a bit of involvement, actually personally leading the effort to do the testing and data gathering that I think is a part of the underpinnings of what we're going to share here today. So as we kind of found ourselves in this in the COVID situation here in the last few months, the district took action as we started the school year to increase what's called the fresh air intake from the outside. That was a very reasonable measure given the types of equipment that we have on our rooftops that actually moves the air around in our buildings. What it's going to do is if there's something in the air and it's going to, more airflow means a quicker turn out of the classrooms or any of our spaces. So we have been doing that here since the middle of summer, and it's been working well. So I'm going to call that kind of option one. The limitations, though, to that really is that our ability to do that ends about December 1st, because right now the quantity of fresh air we're bringing in is going to be diminished dramatically because the air is so cold outside and would do dramatic damage to our HVAC equipment. So we jumped into action to look at what might be a few other options. We took a look at 3 other options. 2 of them I'm not going to spend much time on just because I just want to point out that we did look at them. One of them was the ultraviolet light. What we found and through the research is that the effectiveness of that with COVID is much less than what we're going to propose to, and the cost, both operational costs over the course of time, as well as the initial investment, are significantly higher than the option we're going to recommend. So we kind of looked at that, said that's not right for our district. The next option we looked at was kind of a midway point between what we're going to recommend and what we had been doing. And what that really would amount to is this option would be spending quite a bit of money on computer programming to drive our HVAC units that are on our roof, to do a little dance, to try and bring in as much fresh air when we could, when it could, but when we can't, when it's really cold, to, again, reduce the airflow. But if all of a sudden the day gets up to 40 degrees, for example, you might say I can open up a little bit more and take a little more air in. So more effective than what we have now. But the cost of that was quite significant as well. What we're going to be recommending to you here today is going to be what is called ionization. And maybe before I do get into the details, and Joe and I kind of want to set the stage for really what we're doing here today. What we're going to do is we're going to talk to you about this technology, and it's not an action item, but we do want to get your feedback and answer your questions. Because if the board thinks at this point that we have a lot of reservations, then we probably won't take the next step, which is developing a very detailed engineering plan, which will then lead to an equipment installation and bid plan. The board feels that you're satisfied with this option. We will pull the trigger on an engineering contract with Randy, who's on the phone, and it's going to take them a couple of weeks here to do that, develop the standards, do the engineering that's specific for our buildings. We're installing the right equipment in the right places, and then our hope would be to bring a actual bid back to the board at one of the very early November board meetings for you to, at that point, review that bid, and if you feel comfortable with it, approve it. The cost, we'll get into that a little bit later. I don't want to throw water on the excitement yet. So ionization is what we're looking at. We are presenting it as what we think is the most cost-effective solution, as well as really the most effective overall. So it's kind of a good situation to be in. So
yeah, thank you. And it's not overly complicated from what I've gathered, but I'm trying to simplify it both for my sake and yours. So bear with me as I kind of describe what this technology is, what it does, and why it's to our advantage. So if you think about particulate matter, we've all heard about infectious aerosols and really small particles in the air, so small that filters can catch them, but maybe not as efficiently as we'd like. So this technology actually emits positive and negative ions, which want to attach to the opposite charged molecule in the air, whether that's dust, pollen, dander, in this instance, the COVID virus, whatever it wants to attach to. So the ionization process allows these particles and pathogens that are floating around to, in effect, become larger than they otherwise would be. So this larger particle can do a myriad of things, one of which it can now be big enough to get caught in our filter, filtered out of the air. It can become heavy enough to simply drop out of suspension and land on the ground or other surface that we can then clean it up. Or it can literally be reacted.
It's been neutralized, so it's
Correct, yeah, I was just gonna say, so that, or it can be attached by this ion, which renders it useless. The COVID protein wall is destroyed, and so it's rendered ineffective, okay? Our current filtration system is a MERV 11, which we opted, as Chad alluded to early on, to increase our filtration to the highest amount we could possibly do. So at the current, if we do nothing, we're about 20% efficient at capturing molecules the size of the COVID virus. If we adopt this ionization technology, the whole goal and data supports the fact that we could increase the size of that molecule that would take us from a 20% capture rate on our filters to 65% capture rate on our filters. So a significant increase. As Chad alluded to earlier, we're currently bringing in the maximum outside air that our systems will allow given the ambient conditions. So on a day like this, it actually got a little warm actually this afternoon, but virtually all day, dampers wide open. So we run exhaust fans to keep the doors from blowing open. Like if you ever been to the Metrodome back in the day when you walk out and it kind of pushes you out the door. For security reasons, we don't want that to happen, obviously, so otherwise all our doors would be open. So that's the amount of air we're bringing in to try and flush out anything that's in the air, those particulates and pathogens I mentioned earlier. Ionization, however, will allow us to pretty much maintain what we all used to call normal. So the fresh air intake could be reduced from where it's sitting right now today and go back to a more tolerable event or a more tolerable amount. And why that matters is, as Chad alluded to also, as it gets colder, we reach the capacity where we're not able to heat up that air that we're bringing in that's 16 above or 20 below, 30 below. Did we talk about that weather already? So the next topic I have is about the count. I had a discussion with some folks who were wondering about how many ions is good, how many ions is effective. The amount we're really aiming for is the 5,000 ion per cc is the measurement and up. And why that's our goal, and we've confirmed with Randy, who's on the phone, which we'll turn it over to Q&A here in a second. But why is 5,000 important? It's actually disinfectionary. So it is, the space is saturated to the point where we can then say we're being very proactive in the destruction of pathogens at that concentration of ions. So that's an important part, at least it was as we discovered, oh boy, we can actually disinfect with this product. That really grabbed my attention. And so I guess at this time, I'll turn it back over to Chad for what he alluded to at the finance impacts of this technology, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers from you guys with Randy on the phone.
So the facts I'm going to be talking about are on the bottom of your sheet. So the option we have now, which is bringing in increased air, fresh air, that, depending on how the winter exactly treats us, though, we feel pretty confident it's going to be in a range of about $180,000 to about $225,000. And that would be annually. So each year that we find ourselves in the situation, we would be spending upwards of $225,000 out of our operational budget. The implementation of the ionization, we still float a bit, but the indicators are that that project would be between $200,000 and $250,000, and that would be a one-time investment. operational repair costs and those things are very, 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 very low. So, so it's largely a one-time investment with a payback of probably not much more than 1 year, but just to not overpromise, we're putting the 2-year number out there. So doing what it will do, you know, as a person who deals with rates of return, this is probably one of the easiest decisions that's come through me in my tenure here. So, so I guess we're all open for questions, either Randy on the phone, Joe, or myself.
Jeff, when you mentioned 1 to 2 years, is that based on the model on the right-hand side or left-hand side?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, versus that, because we are making this a baseline assumption.
Sure.
That we will continue to bring in as much fresh air as we can for the next few years. I probably, my gut is saying we're not suddenly going to find ourselves operating a year from now the way we did a year ago.
Yeah.
And reduce our fresh air intake.
So that was my question, kind of piggyback off of that. The number on the left, that 180 to 225, if everything, I mean, we're not going back to normal, but pretend this didn't happen, that number would go to 0 in theory.
So
Or in the past, that number has been 0. Maybe that's the way I should ask. That's probably better.
The way you get the marginal,
Okay.
marginal costs associated with the actions we've been taking this school year, and I would assume we will replicate for the next few years, is $225,000.
So then what's a reasonable life expectancy for the ionization units that we would install? Do we have, I mean, is it a 5-year life, a 20-year life, somewhere in between?
15 years is what I've researched.
Okay.
Yep.
You mentioned the maintenance on that is very low, that equipment, the ionization equipment, or?
The bipolar ionization equipment we're looking to purchase is virtually maintenance-free, self-cleaning.
Okay.
It's literally little tiny carbon fiber fingers that stick up and emit an electrical charge. And there are fingers, I guess, that are on a motorized damper that simply brush those to get rid of any debris that would settle on them, like anything in any dirty airstream, right? That's literally, and they draw about a 1/2 amp per, it's called a cassette, about the size of a large men's wallet. They click together like Legos into a big long segment. So you either need 5 of them or 50 of them, and you just build it up or down accordingly.
Is this put in the plenum then, or is this?
Yeah, it'd be after your filter bank. So it's in the clean air stream, and it emits ions at various different points because it can be placed down the stream. Let's say this was a multi-story building. We would put it in strategic points, hence the engineer on the phone. He would determine at what point we need to put these devices so that we're ending up in the space with the ion counts that we were referring to earlier. Because these have about, Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, these have about a 60-second. Yeah.
So that's one of the engineering calculations we do is calculate how we need that from an ionization system where the ions are created to that fluid actually gets in the airspace that people are breathing. So it's very important that we don't have whatever that percent on ductways and all the ions are used up before they get to the space.
Thank you.
So I have a couple of questions. I'll start with the disinfecting ability on hard surfaces. I'm assuming when an ion comes in contact with something like a virus particle, it would effectively disable or kill that particle. So the 99.5%, is it 99.5 because of the density of ion particles hitting or projected or calculated to hit something on the surface area of a table or of the hard surfaces?
So that result was done in a test chamber. I guess I would defer to Randy about the percentage of the kill rate.
Yep. Okay, so the 99.5% is based on the percentage of those molecules that are projected to get connected to an ion.
Correct.
Okay.
So that crossed
And-
the threshold of the question we wanted to answer for the board is, does this technology have the ability to render a pathogen ineffective? And the answer is yes.
Yeah. That I totally understand and agree with. Is the calculation of 99.5% translatable to the spaces we're talking about here? I'm sure that experiment wasn't done here, but I'm just curious, how well does it translate, let's say to just this room, for example, or any given room?
Randy, can you talk about the test you did at your corporate office and what the saturation levels were in a real world space?
So we did all the research and the implementation with a number of different things that Jen and Joe talked about. But then we brought in a third party testing agency, Interpol, and they spent a week in our office doing the testing of ion counts. And we had had some spaces in our office that were over 10,000 ions per season. So it's a matter of how many ions you can get to the space. Jen and Joe and I have talked about this, and we could, really double up all the, whole organization systems, spend a lot of money. But I said, to go there is probably ineffective and not a good use of money, since you can know your installation costs just to reduce your time. Because really what we're trying to do is get to that 5,000 ions per season count, and that's already considered as effective. We could get to 10,000. This is a matter of cost.
So we did ask him this afternoon that exact question of, let's pretend I want to treat this whole facility, all of our facilities, like they're an operating room. How can we get the count so high that we can look everybody in the face and say 100% guarantee it 24/7, every building you walk into is covered? Is that doable? It's cost prohibitive, but we can get really darn good in a lot of places most of the time.
If I could just clarify something. Randy, this is Jamie Benson. Question, how many of these units have you sold so far? I know that. That was a rhetorical question just to lead in to make sure the board knew that Randy's role in this is not to sell us any product.
Correct.
Yeah.
He's not the snake oil salesman. He's the guy that is an independent who would engineer the design for us that we then would bid out. He doesn't sell the product.
Competitive.
Okay.
And Randy, we appreciate you being on the phone here, so thank you. I just have a couple more questions. Just one more on the previous line. When you're doing that experiment to get the 99.5% determination, were you actually measuring something being disabled, or was that a theoretical calculation of density of ions?
That's a third party independent test lab that manufactures all the ionization manufacturers. I come to the 8 of them that I found across the world now. There's manufacturers in Israel, there's making these ionization systems, but they're all not made the same. The different ways you can create positive and negative ions. But in answering your question,
Is the determination, yeah, the question is the determination of the 99.5% effectiveness, is that based on actually measuring something being disabled, or is that a theoretical calculation based on density of ions and potential density of pathogens? So they were measuring, they were actually looking at COVID virus particles.
That's my understanding. EMSL labs, as we did the test. The
I would
Navy-
love to see that study. I'm not really questioning, and I don't I'm not trying to be badgering or anything, but I'm just very intrigued by that study. Yeah,
The
okay,
Navy
that'd be
is
great.
actually right now studying submarine hulls, so I'm trying to
Mhm.
get on that, obviously get that test result too, because that does bring a certain amount of meat and potatoes and teeth to the argument, right?
Yeah,
The fact that that's even being considered is substantial to me.
yeah. And then one other question is, it's about the 65% efficiency and the comment that is made about how when an ion attaches to something, it makes the thing bigger.
Mhm.
Can you help me understand how that works? Because there's no free virus particles floating around in the air. They have to be carried by something. So how does a droplet of moisture or something get bigger?
So if you're moving around, your supply and return is carried in their stream. They just said again today, that is true. So what we're measuring, and the way filtering station works is we measure filters are sized in three different size zones. From 0.03 to 1.0 microns, from 1.0 to 3.0, and then 3.0 and larger. And so what we're trying to do, the code is in that smaller range from 0.03 to 1.0 microns. That's how small viruses are. And we're trying to make those virus particles, viral pathogens larger. So smaller, so birth 11, as you have installed, become more efficient. They're only 25% efficient in that smaller range, but they're 65% efficient in the 1.0 or 3.0 range. That's how we're trying to get those particle size bigger so they can track that filter.
Yeah, I guess I understand conceptually, but how does the ion make something bigger? Because the filters are not going to be filtering viruses anyway. They're going to be attached to something already that's bigger than the particle itself. But how does an ion make it even bigger? That's what I'm just curious about.
I heard part of that. I think I understand what the question was. So positive and negative ions attach themselves to the particles, to the other viruses, or whatever is in pollen, whatever is in the air, and actually make the particle bigger. So it's easier to encapsulate essentially and make that particle bigger so it grows in microns. So that's how it encapsulates essentially. It just grows. And that's the other way that ionization is effective in making particle bigger, so they either drop to the floor and render themselves ineffective, or they're still carried in the air, brought back to the filter system.
Let's just keep going. I don't think we're going to get to the heart of that one.
Stacy, you have a question?
I'd like to understand the sketch more completely. And so when I see these little dots, I'm assuming that that's a virus, either COVID or some other
Could be.
virus, right? It could be just a flu, it could be anything.
Could be pollen or dust or dander too.
Okay,
Yes.
and so so the big circles are the ones that have been ionized. So
Correct.
they're getting larger. So those, do we just assume that all those big ones are gonna get sucked up and taken away?
So think of my dusty living room, I'll say. I burn wood, so there's always, if you look in on a sunny day, there's always like these
Yep,
beams of light. You can go up with your hand and you can do this.
yep.
And the stuff just kind of swirls around and it never leaves like an 8-foot cube. I'm butchering the description and I'm going off of a conversation I had with an engineer, not Randy. But so there's no way to like swing your arms or use a fan or anything to get them to actually suck into that return grill that's on the other side of the room, right? But if we can add some density, some beef to these things, they will move. They'll travel in the airstream, just like the bigger dust or dirt or whatever does, or the dust bunny that you find next to the return air duct behind your bathroom door or whatever.
Mhm.
So that's really the theory we're trying to represent in the picture, is just the congregation of enlarged particles now able to follow in the airstream, which that's meant to be a return air duct, which would obviously suck back to a filter bank and clean the air.
And so we're thinking that 65% of the time it's going to get the virus or whatever it is. And so then these other ones that are still floating around, are those the ones that drop on the desk and then get disinfected to 95, 99.5%?
I'll inject what I'm trying to represent in this, whether it's exactly what's being represented or not. But in time, I think what's not represented in this drawing is time. So the next hour of treatment, right, there'd be fewer and fewer little dust particles in the air until you reach a point where, I don't know that it'll ever be like a clean room just because of the carpet and everything else we have in here, right? Every step you take, there's puffing of, but if you were to leave this room, let's say it was unoccupied for a 12-hour period, in hour 1, there's gonna be a whole lot of little dots. In hour 2, obviously there'll be less. And by the time you get to hour 8 or 10, there might be two dots on this whole page.
Is that assuming that there would be no more dots introduced into that space?
Correct. Or
Okay,
you'd
so-
have such a saturation of ions that it could compensate or overcome the human load, right? If you put 6 students in this room and you have enough ions dumping in here as if there were 200 students, the recovery rate, or whatever we want to call it, is going to be much quicker. Where if we're at design capacity of 200 kids, it might just maintain. I'm very badly paraphrasing, but am I making sense at all?
Okay. Well,
These ionization systems create 140 million ions per second per inch of water. Which we're talking about 70 bars coming 6 inches. Essentially, you're creating almost a billion ions per second. That's how many ions are being created. It is continuous. It's a very small electron voltage is creating these positive ions. So you're continuously refreshing the air with these positive ions.
But you're also polluting it as people come and go at the same time.
Air cleaners. This is actually ions will create so small that they actually
And that's a big piece that I left out of my little spiel there was Chad had mentioned UV light. There's additional filtration. There's outside air. There's all kinds of things we can use to combat this virus. This is the only technology that I've seen thus far, and I've looked high and low, that actively goes with the airstream and treats in the space, much like a custodian with a disinfectant bottle. Not quite that effective, obviously, there's no mechanical action, but it was the first thing that can go with the air, and we can say with a fair degree of certainty, we're treating this entire space.
and
That's
my-
substantial.
My understanding is that this is used in hospitals too.
Correct. It's currently used in, well, it's, as Jamie alluded to, it's an emerging technology for this use. It's a well-established technology for clean rooms. It's used in Mayo clinics, operating rooms, ICU wards. I don't want to misrepresent and say that we're going to be able to create that same condition. This is just the same technology. We're not going to be able to recreate Mayo Clinic's operating room.
So COVID-19 aside, I'm assuming that's not the only thing this goes after. So how about allergens, pollen,
Absolutely.
all that? So the reason I'm asking this is assuming this works, we've had an ongoing concern about air quality generally. One of the motivators behind putting air conditioning in the middle school was air quality.
Correct.
Students who have asthma, they have allergies, they have all kinds of things. What is the air quality in our buildings? So
Right.
I'm assuming this addresses more than that. Next question, and I missed this, but this will go into all of our buildings,
Correct.
including the REN, including central office,
Correct.
bus garage?
Correct.
Okay, everywhere.
All 10 staffed or student buildings will have this technology, yes.
And just so I understand how the financing works, I think I heard you say that we're currently above and beyond what we used to spending a substantial amount of money to improve air quality.
Significantly more, yes.
Right. And that's how we get the cost savings on this. And Chad, you say the payback is 1 to 2 years if we keep doing that. So I can't imagine that if we installed this and it didn't have to be replaced a lot, that's one question about 15 years.
Yep.
That we would want to commit ongoing to a higher quality of air in our buildings. And that then the payback would be over 15 years more than 1 or 2 years, so that there might be a longer payback. I'm not advocating for this. I'm just
Yep.
maybe trying to state the obvious so I understand.
No, it's a good point. And honestly, you can't put a price tag on human health. And so the energy consumption standpoint is the return on investment. I would never turn these off. I have lab report after lab report I could bore you with. I mean, TB, influenza, C. diff, I mean, E. coli. It has different saturation points and it takes longer to kill a more aggressive bug, but it kills them all. So that was really the two questions before I even pitched it to Chad or Jamie was, can it kill pathogens? And does it detrimentally impact the quality of the air in the building? In other words, does it create ozone? And the answer is no. Not every technology out there can say that. There are plasma tube generators, and as Randy alluded to, there's a whole myriad of ways that you can produce ions. And I'm not going to get into a science class because frankly, I'm not intelligent enough. But if you create an ion in an electrical charge that's greater than 12.07, you can destroy oxygen. So you take O2 and you turn it into O1 and O1, and it goes off searching for another O2 to grab onto. It becomes O3, which is ozone, which is very bad for humans. This comes with a UL certification. It does not produce ozone. Randy has a third-party test he conducted in his main office where they monitored ozone over multiple days while this was both on and off. And they actually had lower ozone inside their building than they did outside. So in effect, it made sense for him to bring in as little outside air as possible, as little as code would allow, because the air inside was in effect cleaner than the air outside.
So again, assuming that this technology works as it's presented to us.
Yep.
This would also, you mentioned all of those things, including the flu. I mean, when we get the flu season. Correct. All those kinds of things, this addresses all kinds of things like that. Not 100%, but certainly far greater than what we've had, far better than what we've got, which is better than what we had.
Correct.
And improved, takes it even to another level. And this could be then ongoing, post-mask, post.
Absolutely. That would be my intention.
Before the next whatever comes along.
Bob?
I think Randy mentioned that we want to get to that 5,000 ion count. That's like what, per cubic centimeter, per whatever it is.
That's the measurement, yep.
I can't see that. But I'm wondering if there's some type. Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't have that good of glasses. But I was gonna say, would there be a third-party test after installation?
Part of the commissioning process. So we've already, as of last Friday, baseline all buildings.
Oh, you have.
So we know what the ion count is because it occurs naturally.
Sure.
Ionization occurs naturally. So we have the baseline counts back at Randy's office, and then we have communicated quite loudly and clearly that 5,000 number is absolutely what we're striving for. So let's design to that 5,000 number a large majority of the time, right? So again, it's a slippery slope to say we can guarantee at your desk 24/7, Bob, it's going to be 5,000, but.
So it is independent. That's
Okay.
what they're going to be doing. And so ultimately then we're going to have the right equipment in exactly the right place to deliver these numbers. 99.5% of the time.
So we'll actually have equipment after the fact, after this is installed, that can monitor ion levels?
Yep. Cell phone.
Okay.
So that-
We would purchase one, so we'd be able to
Okay.
myriad of times do a test here and there.
Okay.
Just to verify.
Can I ask for some clarification on the 99.5? So I got a little confused, I think, when we started talking about filters and making the size of the COVID bigger. I thought I heard somewhere along the way that explain the 99.5 to me, I guess, first.
So I cough right now and I have the flu or COVID-19 or anything like that sitting where you're sitting. Some of it's going to go into the air, catch a ride on the dust that you're seeing here. Some of it's going to go onto the table and it's going to rest there. So what us hitting this 3,000 to 5,000 ions ratio does is it actually then over the course, it's not going to happen in minute one, might happen in minute one, but over the course of an hour, or I forget the exact time, but maybe an hour, it will be able to kill it.
Okay.
It amounts to in the same manner that we said it.
So basically, what I was getting kind of tripped up on is when these ions are attaching to the COVID or whatever it is, it's going to effectively kill it. Why are we concerned at that point, once they've attached to them, how big they are in terms of catching it in a filter, if it's been neutralized by the ion attaching to it?
Mhm.
I mean,
So say you're in such a saturated environment of pathogens where most of them, and I think the piece that's compounding the confusion is it's just time is difficult to represent on that piece of paper.
Sure.
So I guess what we're saying is if influenza A and a TB and a COVID virus happen to hitch onto some dust that was on the carpet and they somehow make it out of the room without an ion actually interacting with their protein wall, right?
Yeah.
And destroying them or rendering them useless. Ions would hopefully have attached to that piece of dust or dirt or dander that they are hitching a ride on. So by default, they're on a taxi that's big enough to get caught in the filter so they can go no further, even though that particular virus might still have its wall intact.
okay, I get it.
But the hope is that, yes, we're interacting with the pathogen and then great, who cares if it moves from the carpet or the table? We just want to kill it.
So the 99.5 to me would be the first line of defense. The 65 is kind of the
That's a
second.
good way to describe it.
Okay.
The 99.5 is first, and then,
This,
well, that gets us pretty close to
Yeah.
killing a whole bunch of stuff.
Over time it
Over
does,
time.
yes. Yep.
so then the second question that I have is, and I know we just talked about a budget and I apologize for not having, but the 180 to 225 that we're seeing in here now, is that going to be above and beyond money we've already committed to for this year? Or was that part of what we looked at as, I mean, you know, I'm looking at if we absorb 200 to 250, that I'm trying to figure out, are we talking about 50,000 or 25,000 more than we're already committed to? Or are we talking about
Sure.
both of
So I
these
think
numbers?
your question kind of ties to Alan's, and this is a good time to answer it, which is that I'm using example numbers, but let's say our natural gas budget, natural gas and electric combined are $500,000.
Yep.
By us taking the actions on the left-hand side of the sheet, they were going to go to $700,000.
Okay.
We did not know that was going to be happening in 10 months ago, 8 months ago, 6 months ago when we were doing our budget. So we now sit with a $200,000 unfunded problem, if you will.
Okay.
We've already essentially decided to take action. So what that means then from an order of operations perspective, and this is kind of the 2 weeks where this can happen, is we're getting all of our enrollment counts, we're getting our state aid counts, we're finding out all of those items here in the next 2 weeks. As of this moment, without having that knowledge, I can tell you very clearly we don't have $200,000. There's a couple ways to look at that. So now that that's clear, I'm going to kind of just make it a little bit clear. Hopefully, is we may have $650,000 in our maintenance budget, but we typically would spend. We might have only planned to spend $500,000. So we built our budget bigger to accommodate bad winters. What Joe and I are going to be doing this next week after we get our September bill is we're going to be modeling where we've been here in the first 3 months of our fiscal year for that large budget I mentioned, trending it against last year and the year before to come up with a forecast for the rest of the year. We got a couple of things going on, which is going to make it a little not as straightforward as one would like, but this building here on the plus side, meaning I should say on the positive side, is this building here has got a brand new boiler. So that's going to have an impact of bringing down substantially that $500,000. On the side where our expenses are going to go up is the middle school is also a very large building and now has air conditioning. So it's going to be going up. And we're also now in a very good environment where energy-wise, rates are very low. So I guess really what it amounts to is we're going to be taking those three major factors and trying to model out where we will end the year. My hope is that in 2 weeks, whenever I present the final budget, I will be able to come to you and say our budget is, again, these are just sample numbers, our budget is $600,000. Due to those three changes, the net of those is $400,000 what we spend. Can we do that? It's looking like a substantial amount of that can come from that. I can't quite promise that though right now. In 2 weeks, I'll be able to
Sure.
let you know exactly how that works.
Yeah, and
So,
I don't expect an
a lot of
exact, I just, but so what I'm understanding is, even on the left-hand side, that money needs to come from somewhere, even if that's the route we choose.
correct.
Here we're looking at, making, if that shortfall is gonna be between 180 and 225, we're looking at adding, say, roughly 25,000 above and beyond either end of those numbers to get to this. Okay,
Margins, yes.
To
To
give
me, it
some
seems like
context-
something,
pretty easy.
To give context to what Chad's referring to, I live a very exciting life, so I live in boilers. So I was actually, for this meeting, in the boiler room, taking a peek at the fire rate, which is how much gas it's consuming. The old plant, prior to you guys authorizing us to change that out, would have been operating at 50% to maintain the water temperature today. There's 6 boilers in there. They're all condensing, high efficiency, and there's only one of them running at 6% right now. So it's an unbelievably, it's
actually, without getting too many details, just that simple situation you said on the coldest day is going to basically exponentially save us, we think, energy. So that's what we've got a lot of modeling to go through to figure it out. But we could very easily cut huge savings very quickly based on that.
So if we say yes, and we do the surveys and everything that would have to get done, how quickly would it take for this to actually become functional in our building?
I'll defer to Randy, but we've been told last week in November, first week of December, of it actually operating. Which in this day and age, to give you an example, to get filters right now is 6 months. So that's a pretty quick turnaround to have a usable product implemented, engineered, bid on, and installed.
Kind of disruption would we be talking about when we talk about the air conditioning? There was some talk about disruption for schools and classrooms. Is this all, I mean, is it minimal disruption?
Very minimal.
Okay.
It's all, and it's happening in a mechanical room. Sure. Students really, other than a guy signing in the office and signing a COVID form, they're not even getting noise here.
There are some other schools that are using this technology as
Correct.
well.
Correct. There's well over 100 K through 12 schools in Minnesota. I spoke to the facilities manager at North Dakota State. I spoke to, in fact, that's where I got Randy's number, was from I know the gentleman up in St. Croix Falls, the buildings and grounds director up there. They just about a month ago put this in throughout. There's
2 very large school districts in Minnesota across the river.
Anoka Hennepin, as an example, is Minnesota's largest school district. They
Most
just
of the private schools, the
Minnehaha Academy. I mean, it's
So now that sort of begs an obvious question. Are any of those schools experiencing lower rates of infection than the schools around them that may not have?
that would be interesting data to see. Yeah. I don't have an answer for you on that.
there's no
Which would also, would,
It'd be hard to bring it down to one.
a lot of variables there.
why? Well, I mean,
So can I ask one more question? This, I guess, is kind of, so if somebody hears the school board is considering doing this and they say, use the example that I'm in this room and I sneeze and I unknowingly have it, in theory, Mike and Jamie and whoever's sitting next to me, is there would you say that their chances of getting it from me were reduced by a certain factor versus if we are doing this or not doing this, or is that not possible to explain it that simply? Okay. Say I cough in the room, and is there a way to quantify what that means to somebody if they say, oh, well, what does that mean for my student sitting next to the other kid? it's probably not stopping the direct event, but if it's just floating through, it's got a good chance of being taken out or mitigated.
Yeah, just show it was actually the U.S. Air Force did the test because they want to use it on planes. But there is time that is in there, so it gives it after 10 minutes, after 20 minutes, after 30 minutes. Obviously, the kill rate for viruses goes up as more time passes. So they do the same thing, so copy the bill. Enters 30 minutes later, pulls it all out, all viral pathogen ready, ineffective by
To your point, Todd, I think masks are effective.
I was
They're
gonna
just
say
as
with or
important.
without a mask,
Sure.
that
So
would
the
be the quantifier too.
Correct. The mitigation efforts we have in place are complemented by this technology.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to sway you one way or the other, just to kind of give context as well. I did a lot of research on this to the point where I installed this in my own home. If I'm going to come in front of you guys and say we should do this for other people's kids, then I feel confident enough in it that I've had it running in my place for about 2 weeks. I can't say that I have all this lab technology and testing this or that. I can tell you, my wife has noticed as well as I that it's dustier than it's ever been. So it's taking things out of suspension,
Oh.
dropping them down onto surfaces noticeably.
So this is like old technology.
It is. This is an emerging use of the same
Yeah.
technology, but it is decades old, very proven.
I guess I guess in my mind, if we get that fast a payback, it seems like something we should really have you guys look into further. It seems like this is something we should really consider. That payback to me that's amazing.
Stacy, you had a question?
Yeah, I agree. So when they would do this, we know that there are some spaces in our buildings that have the potential for more aerosols. Gym, choir room, band room. Would we take that into account? Would it be able to help us differentiate?
That's
for
a good
the use of
question.
the space?
Randy, when you typically design for a gymnasium, an auditorium, a music room, areas where heavy breathing or aerosols would be more persistent or more prevalent, would you, in your design, do you compensate for that? I would imagine you do.
Yeah, large spaces, we try and put more lines in, which typically listen to the airflow, depending on what the area is. We look at each area individually, when we're engineering the ionization systems.
So I'm digging through the back room to get him blueprints from as far back as we can find so they're accurate. He's calculating all that out according to what our actual systems are. Yes, sir.
So I think, pick up on Bob's comment, I'm kind of agreeing because we're not voting on this tonight. We're deciding whether to give you the green light to look into this further.
Correct.
So we do have a chance to step back. But I think if this were just to mitigate COVID-19, that's one thing. It may be worth you doing just for that. For me, as I look at this has longer term benefit for the district. I continue to be concerned about our buildings that don't have windows that open anymore. They're locked in. Air quality in our building is a significant thing. I've thought that for a long, long time. Anything we do to address air quality in our buildings long term is good. So I see this as not just, I mean, the COVID thing is pushing us right now, but this really probably, we'll hear more from you, makes sense for us for a long-term air quality commitment.
Yeah, volatile organic compounds, VOCs we all hear about, it attacks them, breaks the molecular bond, and renders them into benign atmospheric gases. So there are other things or benefits that this does, and it can take, we use quaternary ammonium, okay, for our disinfectant. That's the chemical that actually does the work. It takes, this technology will take ammonia and break it up and make it not burn your eyes and smell like ammonia. It literally breaks the bond of the elements that make up ammonia into the core elements. It's really neat how it works, and it's frankly above my understanding of science, chemistry, and all that. But it's pretty cool to see the diagrams and the theory of how it actually functions.
I'm agreeing with other board
Yeah.
members that I think we should take the next step in terms of what
Looking into
you would do to explore this and then bring back a proposal to us.
Okay.
think if we have other questions about the technology, that we should make sure to get it to you so that you could do some research to help us make an
Happy to
informed
do
decision.
so. That's our job. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy, for being on the phone and muddling through this with us.
Yes, thank you, Randy.
All right. Thank you for the research on that. We'll look forward to hearing more. So we will move on to action items. And the first one, Mr. Benson, do we have a change or recommendation regarding the learning environment?
No change, but I always like to give you the weekly snapshot. So, St. Croix's dashboard, St. Croix County dashboard, Pierce County dashboard. The notable here would be that last week, this under the Harvard model, which is now being used by Pierce County, was higher risk than, that's supposed to be an orange color. It was red last week. So that's progress. It's nothing to necessarily write home about, but it's progress. So again, Pierce County has indicated these overall new confirmed case and probable cases by week, and they've indicated inside of that, the gray is the UWRF numbers. We'll see what transpires now with the students coming back there, the effects on our community and so on. But to the university's credit, I know they're taking some extreme measures in working with the county with their testing specifically. And so again, that's the snapshot. On the right side, big numbers, but the good news is they're coming down. I did talk with AZ Snyder again today, and she gave the knock on wood. Things are definitely improving here in our county, but there's some in Pierce County, there's a little bit of growth in COVID numbers in some surrounding counties, and we all know what's going on in the state as a whole. So UW's website. Here's where last week, again, we were at the red level. Now we're down to the orange. This is just a breakdown in the Harvard numbers. Again, this is directly off of their website. Talks about the daily new cases per 100,000 people. It's a 7-day moving average. And this is St. Croix on the right.
Do you have any insight into what's happening in St. Croix County? I just noticed their numbers have gone up a lot.
I don't know if they have a certain outbreak or outbreaks identified, but again, in my conversation with AZ, she mentioned it's both St. Croix, Polk, another nearby county. And so while Pierce is better, I think I mentioned at our last meeting, we have about, in St. Croix County, we do have about 1,500 of our students. Appreciate that I'm rounding.
Yeah.
And 2,000 of our students at Pierce. I find myself frequently referencing Pierce in relation to, that's the county that we seek our advice from, is Pierce County and AZ Snyder. But I put these numbers up for a good reason, is that we are members of both counties. And so obviously that remains a concern. And again, as I said, this isn't anything to write home about. The fact that you're in orange is not time to celebrate. It's time to recognize that maybe some purposeful efforts are taking hold here. Again, we always say that we never said we were going to just use the Minnesota model. If we were, this is where we would be at. Under that model, I talked last time, to be clear, please don't ever think that I'm trying or attempting to be confusing with the numbers, but in my transparent message last week, I believe that these numbers that are pulled off of off of the state's website would be conflicting somewhat from how these numbers are reported under the Harvard model. They're just not, one includes positive cases only. This Harvard model includes more than just positive cases, but those who have tested positive and have been exposed to someone who's tested positive and they're showing symptoms. This is the positivity rate I've been showing for both of our counties. These numbers are the same as they were a week ago when I indicated the Pierce County school cases in total. Ours also remains the same as they were a week ago. And here's a further breakdown of our district numbers. So again, no recommended changes. I'll put that back up if you want to look at it. We have improved from red to orange. I pointed that out already. And I always like to remind that we all have to keep doing our part. Social, physical distancing, wearing a mask, washing hands and surfaces, and installing ionization. If we believe that it's science that works and is affordable.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just one more comment, because there was a lot of concern about the university's numbers a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's worth people making sure we're aware that I think they've implemented a plan that's pretty amazing. They're testing every student that lives on campus every 2 weeks, which is an incredible monitoring system for that campus at this point. And they have a test center. Well, we should let you say this, but they have a test center on campus. So that's a really robust plan in my opinion.
There was some research in the Star Tribune about colleges that have done that have had success in terms of not having the city's overall COVID numbers increase. So hopefully that testing now can catch them up as a university to impact.
At least that source of it, at least, yeah. Yeah.
Just kind of to piggyback on what Mike said, when I spoke to, I had a couple of questions. I was on the phone with somebody from Pierce County Health earlier today about some of their numbers, and the point that they made is that while we've seen a drop from the initial spike a couple of weeks ago, the fact that the university is going to be doing that testing, I believe, is it starting today before they move back? Yeah. Okay.
No, they already did. They're already doing it. Yeah.
And they're not saying an exact number, but they're saying you could expect to see an increase as a result of additional looking, basically. I mean, before you were only looking if somebody had close contact and symptoms, or just not as frequent. And so they kind of prepared me, that now that we have seen a drop, you're probably going to see a spike, even if I don't know how to interpret that, I guess, but she just was saying, even if things on the surface look better, you could see higher numbers just because they're doing so much more testing, widespread testing.
Yeah, I would maybe, can I add onto that? Because in the context of what they're doing, seeing higher numbers to me is not a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
Because they actually are catching something potentially before it has a chance to get out.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah.
I just, as we look at this in the next 2-3 weeks, there's not really a way to quantify that in some of those models, I don't think.
When you say that, it makes me think of some of these numbers, and whether this is accurate or not. The closest we get to that kind of a robust testing system that Mike described, we aren't doing that. The closest is with our exclusion measures, where 51 students are out due to COVID symptoms. The vast majority so far, knock on wood, the vast majority of our past exclusions in those cases end up not positive. There are other similar symptoms, but those symptoms end up not being COVID related. Another big number, 41 are out due to a household member having symptoms or waiting tested. I mean, that's as close as we're getting, but we are holding very true to that. Our parents and students are being very patient and understanding with it. It can be frustrating for some to have to be excluded under those conditions, but it's as close as we can get to attempting to stop any potential spread, in addition to all those other mitigation efforts, from our hybrid model to 7th through 12th grade, only bringing half as many students in, to the cleaning and the masking and all that goes with it. But anyway, some big numbers, but not big numbers in the test positive arena.
I'm not sure how the absenteeism would normally be, but this is probably a spike in absenteeism because of COVID. And I'm just wondering how it translates for teachers' extra work, as far as, I know they're used to students being out for, a week or something like this, but I don't know if this is an increase in those number of students than it normally would, or
It is.
it is, and they're okay as far as being able to meet their expectations as far as getting out.
They're okay.
Yeah.
Meeting our staff is okay,
Yeah.
but okay is not,
Yeah,
doing cartwheels and backflips. The okay would be not just in reference to those students that are being excluded and the need for teachers to serve them at home. It's just all that goes with the
sure.
many different things that we're doing in our school this year for how we're expecting teachers when they are teaching grades 7, 12 face-to-face with kids 2 days a week, but we're expecting them to educate them 5 days a week, somehow, some way, to our virtual e-school and all that we're attempting to do there. And the list goes on. And so we're doing well, I think, in the morale department. I think that we are all celebrating that we finished the month of September with as much success as we did, and that we're staying the course as to where we are, how we started the year. We're not here tonight talking about needing to do something dramatically different. And so it's okay. It's okay.
Sorry, I don't know if this isn't terribly appropriate, we can do it at a different time, but how will the absences affect things, as we're talking about pupil counts and head counts, and how do the exclusions affect those type of things moving forward? And I'm new enough that I don't know exactly how all of those dates fall and when it's important.
Pupil count on the third Friday is the magical day of every year that we do our official count. And even if a student is out due to these exclusions, they are still counted.
Okay. That was.
Oh,
but
it could be out for a week.
I mean, that might not happen though in a lot of these cases, right?
Okay, so maybe the point of the matter is you are attending school Monday before Monday after.
Okay, you're not saying the day immediately before or the day immediately after. Okay, I see. Okay, thank you.
Oh,
You'll be out for
okay.
days.
Okay. Okay.
I've never had that explained, and it's occurred to me 3 or 4 other times with all of this, and I've never asked the question.
On this, every week when you put this up, Jamie, I'm sort of struck by, it's like you're constantly trying to read this, you and your staff and everybody on the board trying to figure out, so what do we gather from this and how do we make our decisions? All the way back to when we made our decision based on those 3 options that we had this summer, and where we're going to go, totally online, totally face-to-face, or do a hybrid. And I think we all realized at the time that going hybrid was going to be a lot more work for the staff and the faculty and all of that. It certainly was a lot more work planning all the logistics, and I'm just still appreciative and amazed that it's worked out as well as it is. But it just, I was struck this last week when I saw the announcement that Hudson has decided to pivot to hybrid. Okay? they've been face to face. And I wonder how many more districts will pivot to that.
A couple weeks ago, Prescott did a pivot to a hybrid.
And so it's way too early for us to take any gratification in the fact that we've made the right decision, because I don't think we'll know that for another year. But I think based on what we're doing, it's hard to read this. So I'm just figuring, and there's all these other school districts around too, trying to decide what are we going to do and how we're going to do it. So at this point, I'm glad we did what we did and that we've had the success that we had. September's down, October's, and we're in the midst of October, and November through May is still ahead of us. So anyway, but I just, for me, it's an appreciation to the work, the hard work the staff has done.
Yeah, thank you. One of the many things that could close us, we've mentioned in the past that it could be due to just sheer numbers and a COVID spread, and that things were becoming alarming. There could be, if we had too many staff members affected, that could close our doors. Another one that is brought to light in this statewide concern right now is the ability for hospitals to serve those that need to be treated. And, you know, our hospital here works regionally so that if patients test positive here, there's a strong likelihood that if they needed to be hospitalized, some may be hospitalized here, but they also collaborate with hospitals in the cities with other hospitals. So there's a ripple effect that takes place. So if the Fox Valley right now, which is red hot, their hospitals get too full, then patients have to be shipped elsewhere. That bumps that region into a new level of concern, that bumps another region that may have been relying on those hospitals as a backup plan for them. And so that's a thing now in Wisconsin, is the effect that if things don't get under control soon, what effects it might have on our hospital system is another element of concern.
How have athletic events been going? Are people following the guidelines?
Really good. Excellent.
Really good.
Excellent. Yeah. Very good.
That's fantastic. And this week, I think it was this week, there was an in-service for teachers in case elementary has to switch to a different model. Is that right?
We could go Wednesday.
Yeah.
Next week, well, all the weeks are kind of the same right now to me.
Months.
Yeah.
You know, that was that was a planned in-service day, and a little shift that the elementary principals decided to float out to parents, tried to do it in a way to say, hey, your kids weren't going to be in school today anyway, it's an in-service day. Our elementary teachers are willing, if you are able, we'd like to run a little test. We'd like to see how virtual learning goes for you at home. And, pardon me? I'm sorry. I was thinking we talk about getting your weeks mixed up here. So yeah, that is is that what you were referring to or no?
Yeah, you know, either the one last week or the one next week. I'm flexible. I'm curious just how they're going with the teachers preparing, not necessarily preparing, but practicing going virtually.
I'm curious to know how many kids went home.
About 75%.
It was quite a few.
So it's
Really?
pretty manageable.
At West Side, we had 370 some kiddos, and we had 65 stay.
So to Cindy's point, I've got a first grader, and we have now received an invite to join. I can't think of what it's called off the top of my head, but what is it? So, yeah, an app to join, and now she's practicing pushing through assignments on that to us. So I'm guessing we might see some more of that on Monday, but she's been sending some emails and correspondence. So I don't know that it corresponded exactly to the in-service day, but that's the kind of thing we're seeing in preparation if we had to get to that.
So there's practice happening just in
They're
case,
also
so kids will be ready.
practicing at school with the kids. They're pretend you're at home right now. Here's the activity I'm gonna push out to you. They're in the classroom, imagining if they were at home, engaged in that kind of a learning activity.
So is that also, those are also strategies that we could potentially use for snow days or things like that,
Absolutely.
not just COVID days?
Jackie, are our kids with special needs the same as other students? If we go virtual, they go virtual. Like the elementary, the students with special needs are practicing the same thing.
Right, because we don't know if we get the mandate closed, if it's our decision, or maybe we can bring them back. And then we have to know the ratio, and we have to decide who receives, or if we don't get, if we get the mandate that everyone is closed and no one can, we want to make sure that all of our students are there, so they're practicing as well.
Okay. So it's likely to be the same. But
We've
could
been
potentially be
discussing-
different. It depends.
It depends.
That's a horrible answer, but I get it, but it's really a pinchy spot.
We've been discussing if everybody goes home, would we, if allowed by the county, would we bring back some students based on their individual need? And on one hand, as Jackie said, you're kind of in this, it depends on, well, how many plans and how many options do I want her to be creating? And so we've started by identifying, as you mentioned, the kind of in a tiered approach based on their need, tier 1 or tier 2, and at what level could we bring back X number of students as allowed by the county, and what would that look like, what would transportation look like, what would food look like, and so on. But we don't have a clearly articulated plan, but we have been rehearsing and discussing some of those options.
And if the school goes virtual, does the 4K go virtual? Or is that separate because it's in businesses?
Well, I would say this, it depends.
Okay, great, that's what I thought.
But in this case, I would say it depends on, they are basically governed by the Department of Children and Families. In this case, along with COVID, the Department of Health would have some say in, will we keep those sites open based on the need for, I always struggle remembering the correct terminology with not mandatory workers, essential. Would those tier of students be allowed to stay at any of our sites if allowed by the Department of Children and Families and the Department of Health? We may be inclined to say, yes, we're okay with that, assuming the board would be okay with that. So honestly, it does depend, but in this case, I can be a little more definitive. It would depend on those state agencies involved in that determination.
Got it.
So I have special ed staff in every site, at least one, not multiple, provided in every site, so I can look at all of that. I realize that sites are, some of them just the preschool, and some of them are just daycare. And some of them do a combination of looking at how they're all functioning together. And it's like, how do you make decisions? What I'm struggling with right now, how do you make decisions on one point be open for a valid reason, and another one be closed because that's the model. What's actionable, what's not, doesn't matter at this point in time. Just getting those services, it matters.
Yep.
Thinking deeper about that, I'm not quite.
Right.
So from a staff concern level, so you're telling me that every one of the other staff members are at home, schools are closed, but because I'm that special education teacher that provides a service at these 4K sites, you're telling me that it's okay for me to go to work. We hopefully will not wrestle with that decision, but if it comes to that, we will wrestle with what are we supposed to do there.
That's what makes 4K so challenging, right? Is because some of them are in private entities and some of them are not.
Right.
But that would be like offering school at Rocky Branch and not at West Side,
Right.
right? So you gotta, it's a whole different layer that you gotta figure out to be equitable for 4K kids. Yeah, that makes sense. I had another question. So a couple weeks ago, Mike asked if we could get regular updates on the e-school and issues and how they're being resolved and moving forward. Is that something that we'll be able to, I got to be e-school teacher today. Whew. That's tough.
You got a headache?
I got high blood pressure issues. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. Emergency one. So I'm just curious, is that something that we'll get regular? I know we got an update on how it was going last week and how some of the concerns were being addressed, and I'm just curious. If we'll
Yeah,
get
I
regular
did,
updates.
I did not purposefully leave that update off of this agenda. I know Jennifer had prepared a document to talk a little bit about one question, and I think it's apropos, we can squeeze it in under this agenda item, rightly so, to the issue of retention within the virtual e-school or attrition. How many kids started versus how many have now decided this isn't working for me? And I think we started it about 370, and since we started on September 1, we've lost about, I think it's 21 students that have departed. And when they depart, they either choose to go to a different open enroll out to a different virtual program, or they homeschool, or they come back to class, come back to our school. I don't have a breakdown of those 21, how many went open enrollment and how many came back to class and back to our school for in-school learning and so on. I guess I don't have that, but
I thought they couldn't come back to in-school. So none of those 21 would be back in school.
Well, we actually have 3 that are back in school. So on the second day of school, we had one family situation that principal came to me with. And so we transitioned that person because learning really had started at that point. We have 2 that transitioned back based on an IEP into placement. So that's really the only exception, based on trying to meet those student needs through that legal obligation of the IEP. We had to move that placement back. So we had 5 students that open enrolled out into alternate placements. They would have never started with us, but the school that they applied to put them on a waiting list and made them wait and didn't let them know until after a week and a half after school. And they kind of told us, but legally we had to provide them with an education. But they said, well, Jennifer, just so you know, we're on the wait list for EHE, we're on the wait list for state person, we're on the wait list for McFarland. So 5, as soon as they got the approval, then went to those schools. The other 13 have enrolled in homeschool. And primarily that's 8 of them are at the elementary level and 5 of them are at the middle school level.
Got it. Do we do exit surveys when they leave?
We haven't done exit surveys, we just kind of not a formal exit survey, we just have, asked them, where they're going. We are in the process, one of the things that we had wanted to do when we were starting the process and working on the virtual schools, we wanted to try to kind of keep like a normal, 4 weeks, and then look at what adjustments we need to make. We made some adjustments prior to that. This past week, we sent out surveys for parents to give us additional feedback. We'll be doing more surveying of students this week. But I've been meeting with the student groups already, getting some feedback, and we've been trying to make some different adjustments to support our students. Today was a perfect example of we're looking at trying to best meet our students' needs, and that's in the hybrid model too. We had a great meeting today, recognizing some of the concerns that parents are raising in our hybrid model as well as in our virtual e-school, sharing how some of them are similar and how we can make adjustments kind of at a parallel level too. So that we're continuing to look at how can we better serve
think that that's an important point that I wanted to bring up, that we definitely want to be able to keep on top of the challenges and reports about the e-school, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we are also identifying the needs that our students in the hybrid model are also experiencing, so that we're looking to support all of the needs of the kids across the district. And they have always been varied, but now they are even more varied, I think, because of the variety of learning environments. So.
And one of the points is we've got, we're keeping track of those that are looking at transition too. So I have families on the wait list to come into the virtual school, if we'll allow them to, as well as families that are considering transitioning back with us trimester this semester. So as an administrative team, we've made that, we know what that process is, so that we communicate with families in advance to see if they still want to pursue that. And then as a team, we're going to help assist with the student transition.
Great, and we're working with Odyssey Ware to resolve some of the technical issues and things like that, right? That is a really tough platform.
And we're doing some really good modifications with it, but we have control only over what we can do. We don't have control over the server issues, which have been not so good. So I was definitely on for quite some time with our vendor today. And they go down for like a 20-minute block, but that's very frustrating when you're trying to get in there and then it would come up and then it would down. So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges with getting locked out of there, getting the network goes down, all kinds of issues that make it really, really hard to do school at home. And I would imagine it's the same thing with our hybrid students, with being on and off and the connections and the multiple assignments and things like that. I'm sure it's similar. But at some point, if Odyssey Ware can't get better, I think there has to be some consideration to go a different route. Money talks, right? And if there's not a hard line of this needs to be better or we're out, then maybe the incentive to get better isn't quick enough. So I don't know what that line is, but it needs to be someplace. Right, exactly, yep.
Is Odyssey Ware understanding and recognizing the problems that we're experiencing?
Yes.
Okay, and they are
really
doing.
been tracking it with them, and some issues we've been able to resolve, some issues we found a temporary patch until they were able to fix them. But the going down is the number one frustration. Most parents and students have told me that, I can live with a couple of the little mistakes that we're finding inside of the program because we know they're getting fixed. But when it keeps going down and students are trying to work on the homework and they can't work on homework because, like today it was broken pipeline with the year that came up. So, and then, 20 to 25 minutes later, it was back up. But when a kid sits there for 25 minutes, we're trying to get more creative about it. That's just too frustrating for a student trying to get back in the system and they can't. So.
Yeah, we had 13 kids with recess and Monopoly this morning, counting money for our math lesson. So it can be really hard to navigate if you can't get on the system.
So it might be interesting to ask them, when can we assume this is going to get fixed? To have an answer from them, at least to know what their response is going to be.
And I have another, I was able to get a scheduled conference call for Wednesday, like midday, to really get some huge points again besides what I just done. So I continue to kind of force through that as a broken record. But.
And perhaps they could help us understand what realistic options, what we can expect realistically, because then that gives us information so we can decide what we're going to do with that information.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else? All right, then let's move on to letters. We're kind of B and C really flow into each other. So Dave, could you help us just to get us back to where we were last week? We are now working on the second reading of the revision to these policies, largely driven by changes to Title IX regulations. So you can take it from there.
Yep, so in response to the feedback, I made some slight adjustments and then maybe just added some pieces for clarification. So the goal will be just to complete our second reading of B and C, or one's revised, one's the new policies from our last meeting, and then just talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities. So We started by looking at the revisions and only one of the 4 policies that I'm really making any significant changes to is the initial 411.1 harassment policy. And the feedback that I'm responding to is just that idea of making sure that we don't change our harassment policy to unintentionally make it harder to respond to an allegation of sexual harassment that maybe doesn't meet that definition of Title IX sexual harassment. And so what we did is under examples of conduct and behavior prohibited under the harassment policy is we just added that bullet, any and all forms of sexual harassment. And then in parentheses, I didn't put it in there, but if you look at the policy, you'll see what was our prior district definition of sexual harassment. So we're not changing or moving off of what we define as sexual harassment. We're saying that's one form of harassment and we will respond to it. So then that puts the Title IX coordinator, Jackie and me in a little bit of a tricky situation of making sure that we're applying the right district policy. But that's why we got all those modules, right? It's a train us so good, right? So the answer in the policy then is the Title IX coordinator is responsible for determining the complaint procedure to follow. So looking at the fact pattern, looking at the specific allegations of harassment, the Title IX coordinator will be responsible for determining the right pathway. So that's kind of the recommended changes to that. I don't think it's significant because we're actually putting back language that was already in there. So I don't know. I think we can still call this the second reading if that's okay with the board.
So that prior district definition of sexual harassment, what you had taken out last.
Yeah, that's right.
And now it's back.
Yep, that's right. Yep, because in responding to the board's feedback saying we didn't really want to go down a road of limiting narrow.
So my question was, is the word prior necessary in this document? Because does it necessarily mean it's?
That's not in there.
Oh,
It's not
I
in the
thought
actual
when I
document.
read
I can pull it up. But
It's in here, but
this is just my presentation, but if I pull up the actual there, I didn't want to. I didn't have space on my slide, right?
it's
So
including our district definition.
you got it, yep.
Just reference the paragraph or whatever.
That's right. It's, so that, you're not gonna be able to see it, but they're starting with Roman numeral 1. That's what that is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so that's really the only change from the other policies. Is there any questions now that you've had a week to stew on the harassment policy and complaint procedures and Title IX policy and complaint procedures? Any recommendations?
I appreciate you putting it back.
And then just to clarify, there was a question last week too. Well, who decides? Who does what? And so just to clarify, the district has the opportunity to make that decision. It's not spelled out by policy who that person is. It wouldn't be the board. It would likely that the board would kind of stay out of this process because they would be responsible for completing potentially other pieces of problem that is created by this Title IX investigation, whether it's an employee issue or whether it's a student issue. So the Title IX coordinator, his responsibilities are really monitoring and implementing the complaint procedure in respect to this policy, and then there's some other responsibilities that go with it. The investigator is really just creating the evidence, gathering the evidence. It's the district's burden to gather the evidence to reach that determination. The decision maker then makes that decision, and then the appeal decision maker is there as that piece. One thing in the training now that I'm learning, and we haven't locked ourselves in, but we had kind of said the decision maker would be the district administrator in a normal situation. Most districts are making that person the district administrator, the appeal decision maker. So they're having internally someone else be the decision maker, and then the last layer is the district administrator. Our policy allows that flexibility. We don't have to do it that way, but in one of the many modules, I've heard that as kind of a logical path.
So is this specific to Title IX?
That's correct.
So is there a reason we can't just have, like if somebody experiences sexual harassment, is there some, I don't know, it seems like there should be one procedure, maybe there's a Title IX person and a non-Title IX person, they both deal with it.
make sure that we're compliant with all right. So the Title IX definition, I think, my answer to that, would- the Title IX definition is a much higher standard. It has to be pervasive, it has to be objective, it has to be understood, pretty high standard. So I think we have with our harassment policy and harassment complaint procedures, a process, an avenue for an alleged victim to go down. If what they're describing doesn't meet Title IX's definition. And we wouldn't want to have the same process, because if you hear the lawyers describe this process, they've explained it as very, 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 very complex. And it's something that will likely, in most scenarios, require bringing in a third party to support the process. And we have a good harassment complaint procedure in place right now that uses a K-12 school level of investigation that normally can meet the needs of the situation that's taking place, unless it reaches that Title IX definition or standard.
I'm just trying to understand, like, if something happens, what is the first part of the process? There's somebody, yes, who looks at the initial data and says, this needs to go to the Title IX.
It would go to the Title
versus
IX.
the non-Title IX.
Right. So the critical piece in the training piece, though, is to have employees, especially teachers, counselors, and principals, know that and understand that and bring it to the Title IX coordinator, so we have notice of it.
My understanding is most of the time is that there's a harassment is filed, or whatever the right word is. It would be as general sexual harassment and could be elevated to Title IX sexual harassment, right? But they would oftentimes move together and be decided differently because the processes are different.
Right. And that responsibility is on that Title IX, right? To kind of say, this we need to treat this as a formal complaint based on the allegations.
Right. So if I accuse somebody of sexual harassment and I didn't want to report it in writing, it could not be considered a Title IX harassment.
Unless they
So
file.
that would cut it.
No,
Unless you file it.
unless I file it, it's my responsibility to file.
Right.
Right. But you're right.
There's different cut points that would say, it can't be Title IX, but it can be sexual harassment as a district policy, state statute.
Yep, exactly. Yep. That is all.
I like that you moved it back here. You moved it to the lower threshold and we can elevate, not this part, but the definition of sexual harassment. It can be elevated rather than putting the definition of all this into elevated.
Yep, makes sense.
Right, but I think this makes a lot more sense.
Yep.
This is more information.
Okay, so at this point, do we have a motion to approve the second reading of revisions to policy 411.1 harassment and 411.1 the rule regarding complaint procedures? Thank you, Amy. Is there a
I'll
second? Thank you, Mike. More questions, comments? This is complicated. Thank you for putting that back in and for getting back to us, Dave, about our questions.
And thank you for serving as a Title IX coordinators. It does not look like a fun job to me, and the training that I have had on it. And so kudos to you for stepping up in that role.
And I hope you never need it.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to be in that if you don't have to. Yep.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is carried. And now do we have a motion to approve the second reading of policy 411, Title IX, sexual harassment, and policy 411.11, the rule for the Title IX sexual harassment complaint procedures?
So,
Thank you, Amy. A
Second.
second. Thank you, Cindy. Questions, comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you for your work, Dave, getting this into policy. It's complicated, we recognize that. So do we have any proposed items for future agendas? Yes, Bob.
we talked a lot about fall sports, but I think it's time to start talking about the discussion of winter sports. I think they're probably more closer contact with wrestling and that type of thing. I don't know.
Yes,
That'd be
I'm
some-
not sure that there is direction yet, but we're
Something to think
monitoring
about,
it. And so as soon as there's something, we will definitely bring that up. But thank you.
WIAA has given no
Nothing yet.
change, no indication, other than Raleigh presented a few weeks ago regarding that adjustment to the calendar.
Sure.
And hearing nothing, I think we are all assuming that currently the WIA has no alternative plan.
They'll probably put it back on each individual district like they
Yep.
did fall.
And you're right, it will be complicated there. in
Yeah,
those
it will be.
sports,
I think so.
Close contact. Alan?
Stacey, two things.
Mhm.
One is, as soon as we know, I talked to Aaron a little bit ago. I think we should talk as a board about the WASB meeting, because since it's going to be virtual this year, that means that in part or in full, all of us can connect with the WASB conference in January. So as soon as the schedule is out, we may want to talk about it as a board and decide who's going to do it all, who isn't. Are there sessions? I could even envision that there are some sessions that if we saw, because they're going to record them all, that we might want to sit and watch as a board at some point. So I think that's the kind of stuff, I think we have an eye toward that and just see. So whether that's, I think in November, Aaron said it's coming out, so maybe one of our November meetings after it's come out, we can maybe have a conversation about that as a board.
I was thinking about that too. What was your second thing?
And the other is, Jennifer and I have been talking about ed programs. If we start having our committee meetings, short committee meetings beforehand, not necessarily to do business, but we really need to begin to figure out a plan for ed programs for sure. Kind of what's the schedule for how we're going to, for what's coming up and how we're going to plan. So maybe to have a conversation about that. And I'm especially interested in us from that standpoint. At some point, maybe later rather than sooner, but at a certain point, begin to talk about what are all the implications for this, for what our district is going to look like, what our curriculum, what our faculty, what our options are, and all those kinds of things post pandemic. And I think that there are lots of implications for us to be thinking about. We've launched a virtual school. We've invested a lot in our training. There are implications for what's going on here with the homeschoolers, or the options we've got here in the community and all of that. And we need to be thinking about that the rest of the year. That's not for right away, but I think that's a program's topic to start taking up some 10 winners.
Yes, so the first point that you made about committee meetings, that actually takes us right into Eve, which I can talk about unless, does anybody else have an agenda item? Okay, so Jamie and I have talked about this too, that really, I think that one of the reasons that we have been a successful board in terms of the process of making decisions is the work that we do in committees. And so we're thinking about ways of slowly and gradually moving back into our committee structure. And so the idea is that on October 19th, that we would have our first committee meeting that would be short, 5:30 to 6, and then we would go into our special board meeting at 6 o'clock, where we could then have another report about what we did. But it's a way of slowly, gradually moving back into that committee structure. So I don't know that there would be, well, we could think about adding something for a program, yes?
That due process starting next Monday.
Yeah, I think next Monday.
The 12th.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did put that down. I'm sorry. Yep. So that we would be slowly doing that. And then that program would not meet until November.
November 2nd, it's got.
I think we're actually planning practically for November when we talk, but still recognizing that because we have limited time, if there's other agenda items for action to add those to the regular board meetings, but then some good educational programming sessions and items that we want to have a little bit more of a conversation around in our educational programming.
Bob, we wanted to avoid the second Monday with that program, right?
If you can, looks like you did.
We did.
Yep, that's great.
So I think that we will even, I mean, there is something different that happens in our committee that we would have a different physical space. We would be back there where we would still be physically distant from each other, but that we're seeing each other more. It's harder to have our conversations when we're not
Would-
able to see each other at the same time.
Would those be open to Zoom as well?
At this point, we were thinking that the updates would be given at the board meeting and that would be included in Zoom, but we're open. This is all trying to figure out how we're gonna go.
Is there any, are we legally required to have those be open meetings?
They could be, we do.
It'd
have
be open to
They're
the
open.
public, but
Yeah.
we weren't gonna do the setup.
So,
the
but it would,
tech setup.
but then in theory, for the public to come, we'd create a possibility that there'd be more than a certain number of people in a room, I guess.
We could.
Not that
based-
that's a realistic thing
no,
that ever
based on-
happens, but
Based on history,
Yeah.
we wouldn't anticipate that. Again,
Yeah.
we can do it however.
yeah.
And we can try it out and we can decide to change if we need to.
And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't do that. I think we should do what you're suggesting. And if we get a crowd of people that all of a sudden want to come to a committee meeting, then we just, we adapt at the point.
Absolutely. But the
Yeah.
other thing is, there would still be at each special board meeting, a committee update like we have done in the past. And so that we would be sharing with the public.
Yeah. And then the board meetings, are we thinking we'd still Zoom those?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
I think those days are.
I think we'll always.
I
do
think
something.
we'll,
be
yeah,
here for a
exactly.
long time.
I think this is a good way to get back into the committee meeting thing and maybe it'll take us there. The last few months here have been all about change, and I look at one of the biggest changes is trying to do a programs committee meeting in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, that might be a positive thing there, Alan. There's something.
The only concern I would have is, I mean, I can make arrangements to attend. It looks like, for finance and facilities would probably be once, but it's on Mondays, the way it works for me now, without like completely reworking a schedule for work, it's about 5:50 or 6 o'clock is, as early as I can make it. And I just also want to be aware for staff purposes, it's probably unlikely that there's a 6 o'clock meeting that you're doing anything between 5 and 6 for yourself as it is. But I also feel like we've asked a lot of the people who are here every week for however many weeks now. I'm a little bit concerned about adding time on the front end of that without taking time off anywhere. And so I don't know how to solve that necessarily, but I would like to see it work where it might mean an hour or a half an hour back on the back end of some of these Mondays if we're committing to that time ahead. Or I'm not so much worried about the 7 of us. I'm thinking maybe about everybody else that has to put a lot of this stuff together too. So,
I agree. I think that what this means is that we need to have some of the conversation happen prior so that it can be summarized and doesn't have to be rehashed. We need to keep track of that. Are you suggesting that 5:30, would you prefer that we start with the committee meeting at 6 and then the special board meetings at 6:30?
I mean, I don't need anything to be reworked for me specifically. I just,
But I'm asking if that would have that help you?
it would.
Is that okay with everybody else?
Yeah,
But that might make it worse for other people who have availability at 5:30, but would rather be home a half hour earlier too. So I'm not asking for any special arrangements to be done that way, but I'm just saying it's going to be trickier for me to, 6 o'clock is about as early as it's going to work for Mondays.
Is that okay with you folks? So we would change this. So that we would, rather than 5:30, the committee meetings then, I'm going to go through and see if I can figure this out. Personnel will meet Monday, October 12th at 6 o'clock. There will be a special board meeting Monday, October 12th, starting at 6:30. Finance and facilities will meet Monday, October 19th at 6. The next regular board meeting will be Monday, October 19th. We'll keep that one. That will be at 6:30. There will be a special Board of Education meeting on Monday, October 27th. That could be at 6
6.
o'clock. And then, what?
26.
26th. I think I said, yeah. This mass, 26th at 6 o'clock. And education program will meet Monday, November 2nd at 6 o'clock.
Will there be a regular board meeting after their special board meeting after that?
Well, we'll schedule the rest of the Monday. We'll schedule the rest of November at our next week.
So maybe I'll throw one more idea out, just maybe to start thinking about. I think what kind of the primary driver for us meeting every Monday as a board was to monitor, the numbers and so on, and just to be prepared to make a change if we needed to. And it seems like that, if we don't feel we need that, and we can always call a special board meeting if the numbers start to blow up or whatever, and the administration decides, I think we really need to revisit this. But maybe we can start to think about not having board meetings every Monday again.
I think what we talked about was just keep doing it through October and then see how November would work.
Yeah.
So it could be that you're
Yeah.
exactly right, that even this meeting on, maybe we can be so fortunate that ed program could be the only one that is meeting on November 2nd. But can we just
Yeah,
hold off?
yeah. I wasn't suggesting right now,
A
but
little
just
superstitious
begin to start thinking
making
about
a
that.
change and not meeting
I
weekly.
think I just
If
jinxed
we're
it.
gonna make that change, my wife will be happy because then I get to change my socks that I've been wearing since the 1st of September.
Oh, my God. Hey, Aaron, can I sit over there next time?
I haven't noticed I'm wearing a mask.
Yeah, that's why we're all in masks.
So does that all make sense to try? And then if it doesn't work, we can change. If we want to do something else, we can change as well. All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Jeez.